Okay, so hi everybody. I'm Robbie. I'm an IC peer advisor here, and I'll be presenting with my colleague Jake on booking international flights on a budget. So today we'll be talking about tips for finding lower cost airfare, avoiding pitfalls, helpful apps and websites, and then we'll go over some information on passports and visas. And then we'll do a demo, and also we'll have a Q&A at the very end.
And I'll just add too that if anyone has any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to either unmute yourself and ask or type them in the chat. So we do have time for Q&A after, but you can ask questions at any time. And if applicable, we'll get to them in the moment, or if also applicable, we'll wait until the Q&A.
Okay, so for finding lower cost airfare, flight prices nowadays are based on a lot of different factors, including like inventory, how far in advance you purchase them. There used to be kind of like a day of week and time of day that you could like purchase them to get cheaper flights, like Tuesdays at 1 p.m. or early Saturday or early Sunday mornings actually. But nowadays there's like an algorithm, and they can change them monthly, weekly, daily, even by the minute. So there's not like a good time to buy unless it's like it's better to buy more in advance, but there's not a specific time of day or week to buy. And also you want to be deciding if price or flexibility is more important. So it'll usually cost more to be more flexible, like change in cancellation penalties. But if you don't really need to worry about that, then you probably don't need to pay for that. So you can buy a cheaper ticket that won't have that factored in. Also, you can get a little crafty with your flight planning. Consider an open jaw, which means basically like flying into like our example, flying from Detroit to London, and then on the way back, you go from Paris to Detroit. So if you're going, instead of like a round trip flight, you can just pick which destination you're going to first and which one you're going to be leaving from last, and not have to even like go from Paris to London in that example. Also, some airlines offer what's called a free stopover. So this is where, like in Iceland, they'll let you stay for 1 to 7 nights at no added ticket cost, and you can rebook your flight out of Iceland at no added cost. In Spain, they also have a similar program, but it also adds discounts on hotel stays, airport transfers, entrance to museums, and also they include a complimentary transport card for 2 days, which is super nice. And also Air Portugal has a stopover program. It's kind of close to Spain. It's really useful for getting into Europe. That's in Lisbon. And the most comprehensive one that we found is in Turkey. Business class passengers with a stopover of 20 hours or more will stay in a 5-star hotel in Turkey for up to 2 days. If you're economy class, it's a 4-star hotel for 1 day. And then they'll give you like a free city tour, including bus transportation and meals. So that one's super comprehensive, but stopovers in general are a good way to see a new place at no extra cost in like extending your trip with like your flight out. Yeah, so more tips for finding lower cost airfare. The date of the flight, prices are more expensive generally during the summer and holidays. So there's also Tuesday, Wednesday, and Saturday are generally cheaper, and Friday and Sunday are more expensive. So look at the day you're flying out and to see if you can kind of reshift your plans to a cheaper day. Also, so I found this out when booking a flight for this summer. Flying out of a different airport can sometimes get you a cheaper ticket. I'm from Detroit area, so usually I look at Detroit for flying out, but I found this summer I'm going to London, so I found a super cheap flight from Chicago to London instead of Detroit to London. It was like $300 cheaper, I want to say. And all you have to do is like find transportation to Chicago then, but it's going to work out to be cheaper. So that's sometimes a really good option. And also you can, with the online flight finders, you can use like the Explore tab on Google Flights to just find where is cheapest to fly to from the airport you're looking from. So in the picture on the right there, that's from Detroit, just looking at different areas within Europe you can fly to, and you can kind of pick which one you'd like to go to based on the price. And also Kayak and Skyscanner have this too. It's you just search Detroit to anywhere. There are also student discounts you can find. We'll have a link later in the slides to a specific site called Student Universe. And those are pretty useful. They'll give you like, just because you're a student, they'll give you certain discounts. And then something else to keep in mind is something called the 24-hour rule. It's a bit specific, but the US law requires all airlines to give customers the ability to request a full refund for almost any flight within 24 hours of booking. It doesn't matter if you're booking with a US-based airline or a foreign carrier. If your flight touches US soil, you're covered. But there's a couple little exceptions here. Some flights booked last minute may not qualify, so you need to double check the fine print and make sure that what you're booking applies to the 24-hour rule. And also some third-party agencies like Expedia honor the 24-hour rule, but others don't. So double check that as well. But in the past, you would use the 24-hour rule for like locking in the price of a cheap flight and then checking the next day, and maybe you see that it fell again. Well, you can rebook with that cheaper price and then get your money back for the first flight. All right, so now we're going to talk about avoiding pitfalls. So a mixed carrier ticket is where you buy just an example, like Detroit to New York on Delta, and then New York to Paris on like Air France, something like that. We're going through two different airlines or more than two. You need to make sure that your luggage transfer works. Like they won't transfer the luggage if you're switching airlines. So you need to factor that into the time of your layover. So sometimes that goes wrong. So definitely make sure you have enough time to pick up your luggage if you're doing mixed carrier tickets. Also be wary of booking through a third-party site. Usually they have better deals, but there are several challenges in getting refunds and making changes. You likely won't get a seat assignment, and you might not be notified of updates by the airline. You also get fewer traveler protections. And if you do book through a third party, make sure you get a booking reference number for the airline you're flying through. Sometimes you don't get that, and that's like a sign that you may not actually have a ticket. So if you do get a booking reference number, that means you have a ticket. But if not, you really want to go in and check and make sure you're not losing money there. Also, look for the best value and not the cheapest. So cheaper doesn't always mean better. Like we were talking about, the third parties generally have better deals, but sometimes they can either be scams. Not all of them are scams, but sometimes they can be. But they also just sometimes have like weird problems with them, like not getting a seat assignment and like fewer protections for changes and whatnot. So look to get the best value out of your ticket. And also make sure you're looking closely at total travel times in your itinerary. So for layovers, we kind of recommend at least 1.5 hours between your flights. That's enough to get out of your last flight and make it through the airport. Sometimes airports are really huge, and the layout is not how you would expect. You're spending a lot of time traveling in the airport itself. That's something I went through last summer. I had a layover in Paris that was 2 hours, and I didn't expect it to take the full 2 hours to get from my gate to the other gate, but I had to go through customs at the airport, and it ended up taking the full 2 hours. So we recommend at least an hour and a half more if you want to be safe. And yeah, that being said, the cheapest flights can have very long layovers. And that's just something to look out for. If you're okay with that, that's great. But sometimes that's like a deal breaker for some people. So just make sure you're looking at the total time spent. And also, like I was saying, look at the layout of the connecting airport to make sure you know how far you might be going. Yeah, and then just a note, direct is not equal to nonstop. So a direct flight means you could sit on the runway to refuel at a different airport than your final destination. So that's extra time spent that you're not in the air. So just be aware that those are not the same thing.
So before we move on, there is a question from Chineri. Code share airlines do transfer your bags, right? And I can address this, Robbie. So yes, that's correct. So Robbie, I know you mentioned like an example using Delta and Air France. So Delta and Air France are actually partners, so it's possible that they would that your bags would automatically transfer as long as you make a booking with the same airline. So if you make 2 separate bookings between Delta and Air France and have like a different booking reference number, then it's almost certain that you would be responsible for I think you use Detroit to New York. So like in New York, you would have to get your bags, go through like recheck your bags at the check-in, and then go through security again. But that's just because like Air France is kind of like the Delta's European partner. But let's say you fly like Delta from Detroit to New York, or you see a flight that says Delta Detroit to New York, and then an example of Europe would maybe be I believe like Lufthansa, which is a United Airlines partner, from New York to like Paris or something like that. Then that would be 2 separate bookings where you would have to recheck. But if you make if you fly like Delta and then Air France on the same booking, then it's likely that you wouldn't have to be responsible for transferring or like picking up your bag, and it would be transferred for you.
All right. So some more pitfalls here. Also research your additional fees on your bookings. You can get like baggage costs, seat selection, flight insurance, cost of checking in at the airport. So there's a lot of not hidden, but additional fees you can come up with when buying tickets. And also only book your flight after your final program plans have been determined. So for like a study abroad or intern abroad, make sure that you know the start and end dates so that you can make sure that you're there during the actual program. And also pack an extra set of clothes in your carry-on, because for really long flights, sometimes I know Jake has a story about this, but sometimes something can go wrong with your luggage, and it's really important to have some extra. I don't know if you wanted to share, Jake.
Yeah, I'll chime in here. So yeah, personal experience. I was flying to Buenos Aires, Argentina a few years back, and I was supposed to go from Detroit to Atlanta and then Atlanta to Buenos Aires, and my flight in Atlanta got canceled and needed to be or my flight from Atlanta to Buenos Aires. So after I landed in Atlanta, I found out that my flight got canceled. So so Delta set me up in a hotel, which was nice, so I didn't have to pay for that. But I was spending the night there, and they did not give me my checked luggage. So fortunately, my carry-on, which was my backpack, I packed an extra set of clothes, so I didn't have to wear the same set of clothes twice in a row. So for that reason, it's nice to pack an extra set of clothes. Another reason is if you're going from somewhere from like very cold temperature to very warm temperature or vice versa. Because if you like, a good example is if you're going on like in the southern hemisphere from the US, the seasons are opposite. So if you're going from like winter to summer, you might leave with like a sweatshirt or a hoodie or even a winter jacket and then arrive in like really, really hot weather. So in order to make yourself more comfortable, you might want to pack like a t-shirt and shorts and stuff like that once you land. So yeah.
Yeah. And then also, you want to double check the food options that are going to be on your flight. Just because if you have special dietary restrictions, make sure you notify the airline in advance and you can see if they have alternatives for you. And I think, Jake, you also have a story on the next one. Make sure your name and passport info are correct. Like, make sure it matches your government and passport ID. Because if your ticket is different, you'll run into issues.
Yeah, and I actually ran into an issue the last time I traveled this past summer. And my partner who I was traveling with, she her name's Kathleen. Her given name is Kathleen, but she goes by Katie. And although I thought we, checked everything when we bought our tickets, on her flight reservation, it said Katie instead of Kathleen, and her passport says Kathleen. And although it's like it seemed obvious like that is her because it's a different name, we got a lot of trouble from customs, from the airline and everything. Fortunately, we didn't have to like rebook or pay a fee or anything like that. But I have heard instances, especially on lower budget airlines, where that is the case. If like your passport number is one number wrong or your name's misspelled or things like that. So it seems very obvious, but just double check, maybe obsessively check to make sure that everything is good to go. Because traveling, especially traveling internationally, can be very stressful. You're very tired. You might be more likely to be like cranky. So just make sure that when you're booking the flight and like in your own time zone and in a good headspace, that everything's right to prevent anything from happening bad in the future.
Yeah, and one final note on this slide is read all of the fine print. It's really important to know what you're getting into. So just make sure that you're reading that and making sure nothing is a surprise.
Thank you, Chineri. Even a middle name, like if your passport does have your middle name on it, make sure that that's included when you book your ticket. You want all the information that's available in your documents, like your passport, to match what is included in your like airline ticket reservation. So when in doubt, just make sure everything is the exact same. It'll save you a lot of time and hassle. All right, so if you're curious of what types of resources to use in terms of websites or apps or even newsletters, Robbie has been referencing quite a few. There are a lot of like aggregate flight search engines. I prefer Google Flights, but there are others like Skyscanner, Momondo, Kayak, and Orbitz. They're it doesn't really matter which one you primarily use if you have a preference, but I think it's good practice to check all of them because they might have slightly different prices. If you're really concerned about price, just look through them all and see which one are giving you the best offers. But they don't have student specific discounts. Student Universe is a is a company that does have discounts exclusively for students. And it's not a given for every single flight that you want to buy, it'll be cheaper just because you're a student. It's just some specific flights. So I would just recommend looking and seeing. You do have to, for Student Universe, you can create a free account, and you do have to like send a copy, like a PDF of your university ID card to prove that you're a student. And then they'll like give you student access. So something to consider. And on Student Universe, you can also book like hotels or hostels, like accommodation for discounts as well. A really helpful app for finding out the best time to buy a flight is called Hopper. It's free to sign up for as well, but basically, if you know dates or date ranges that you want to travel, you can plug in those specific dates, and Hopper will take them and let you know if it's a good or bad time to buy those flights. So sometimes it will say, we don't envision the current price to go down in the future, so we recommend that you book now. Or it might say, we recommend you wait. We don't expect prices to go up within the next 2 months, and they might even go down in the near future. So they give you kind of a recommendation as to whether to wait or not when buying a flight. And then a resource that I use and love actually is it used to be called Scott's Cheap Flights, but they recently rebranded to a more generic name called Going. But it's an organization where you can sign up for basically a newsletter, and they'll let you know of all these different cheap international flights that pop up, and the date ranges that they that you can travel within, or to go to those locations, and then a recommendation of how long they think that flight price will last. So I'll admit, this is more for like a flexible traveler if you're not, bound on traveling during specific dates or maybe even to specific locations, but you can filter by airlines that you want to, or the airports that you want to fly out of, as well as locations that you'd like to fly to. So I think it's just, even though like I'm not traveling very, very frequently, it's always just fun for me to see all the different like crazy flight deals that you can get. So sometimes it's just me dreaming about all these options that I can't go to, but it's still really useful to sign up for their newsletter as well, because they have various resources that they send. They'll send like a weekly email of highlighting a different location around the world that's fun to read about, or other resources with different tips. And we've included one link to how to find cheap flights in 2023 that I think it's really useful to read into. Some of the information that we're sharing with you now is from that article. I do see a question. How do I know if I need to check in the luggage if I have to stop inside the USA? For example, when I came to the USA, I had to pick up luggage in Chicago and check into Detroit. If I am traveling to Chicago, then international, will I do the same thing? Yeah, I think this is something that you'd have to check with the airline. It would be nice just to get clarification from the airline whether or not you need to pick up your luggage or not. So yeah, yeah, like Kelly said, it may have to do with going through customs. Like if your first entry point to the US was Chicago, then yeah, thank you, Chineri. So yeah, it might be more the case that Chicago was your first entry point into the US, and that's why you had to pick up your luggage. Yeah, if you're going, so if I'm traveling to Chicago, then international. So if you are flying from Detroit to Chicago, and you purchased like the flight on the same booking code, then you will not have to you will not have to recheck in your luggage when you get to Chicago. They will make the transfer for you. Good question. All right. So wanted to make a couple notes about passports and visas. I know this is a little bit different than booking flights internationally, but this is an important component of that. So if you don't have a passport and are planning on traveling this summer, you need to apply for a passport immediately. Or if you need to renew your passport, you need to apply to renew your passport immediately, because processing times, I believe on the State Department's website, normal processing times are 8 to 11 weeks. And you can pay to have it expedited. And I think expedited times are 5 to 7 weeks. But just make sure that you that's something that you're doing immediately. If your passport situation is good, just make sure that your passport is valid for at least 6 months after you're going abroad. Many countries have requirements that your passport needs to be valid for at least 3 months, and many times at least 6 months from the date that you arrive in an international or in a foreign country. So if that's not the case and you realize that your passport's expiring soon, make sure you renew immediately. As far as visas goes, it's always good practice to assume that you will need a visa no matter where you're going. For Americans, that is not always the case. Many Americans are able to travel to various countries, especially countries in Europe, for up to 90 days. But there are certain countries that will require a visa. And if you're not sure if you'll need a visa or not, I would recommend looking at that now. The International Center just created just updated our visas page, and we have a link to it. So we definitely recommend you looking through this. It gives great advice on how to apply for a visa, any maybe common application requirements for visas, visa international or non-US visas for international students. So if you're an international student and need a visa, even for travel as a tourist, gives great advice on that, different types of resources and some frequently asked questions. So highly recommend looking through that if you have any questions. And on that resource, one recurring theme that you'll see is that we highly recommend that if you have any questions, if you want the most accurate and most up-to-date information, you should contact the consulate or the embassy of your destination country. From our experience, calling a consulate or embassy is better, but please note that they have very limited hours. They might only be open for like 3 hours a day in some instances. You can email at any time, but most of these consulates or embassies receive a heavy volume of emails, so it might take a while to hear back from them. All right. Depending on the countries that you're traveling to, some might offer a visa on arrival. So you wouldn't need to prepare for anything in advance, but you will need to be aware that you will need to get a visa on arrival, and you will need to potentially pay for a visa on arrival. So make sure you're looking up the costs and potentially having the local currencies on you, because some countries that give visas on arrival will not take US dollars and require you to pay for that visa in the local currency. Then lastly, it's a good idea, whether it's on your phone or to have a physical copy, to make sure you have access to a copy of your passport, your visa, maybe even a passport picture, because especially if you're doing a visa on arrival, you might be required to have a passport picture on you. And passport pictures and visa pictures can actually be obtained through Michigan Photography, which is a location on campus in Ann Arbor. It's or at U of M. It's on the IC Visas page. So that's a great resource to get something on campus. And then it's also a good idea to have a copy of your flight information as well. So when in doubt, it's always a good idea to have more information than you think you might need. Yeah, and I see Kelly and Shaniri sharing a lot of additional comments about visas and passports. So so thank you for that. Okay, so before we get to the demo, which we will do very shortly, just wanted to highlight a couple upcoming events. So this event is part of a larger event series called Global Wolverines. And it's basically an event series to help prepare students for upcoming travel abroad, especially those who are doing like work and internship programs abroad. So we have coming up in March through April, we have a Staying Safe and Healthy While Abroad. We have travel considerations, which will kind of cover more logistics than just purchasing your flight. So like more like in-country travel, accommodation, luggage tip, like packing tips and stuff like that. And we'll give some tips on region because there might be some different considerations based off where you're going. There is one about exploring culture and respectful community engagement, making the most out of your international experience, which will be in collaboration with the University Career Center. The Language Resource Center and us will be doing a survival language and culture. So like if you're traveling to a location where you don't know the language and are just trying to think of some basic tips on how to get by, that'll be useful. And then while you're actually abroad, we'll have one called Managing Money and Budgeting. So tons of different travel related sessions later on this semester. And if you're, there is something part of Global Wolverines called the additional support option, where you can join and there are additional perks to doing that, such as us purchasing your travel insurance. We might have like specific sessions for those who register for the additional support option. There's a certificate of completion, different things like that. So that application deadline is February 28th. So something to consider. Just catching up on some questions. Yes, thank you, Kelly. There is a mailing list for Global Wolverines, and we are working on a Canvas site. So we'll try to consolidate all of the information and resources that we share. Is there anything to meet up with people who are traveling to the same place? Well, I guess that might depend on if you're going through like a study abroad program or like something organized. If you're just traveling to a location, not that I'm aware of. I mean, certainly if you're part of Global Wolverines and others are traveling to the same place or region, and we'll offer opportunities to connect. So yeah, it might depend on your specific situation, Lily, as to whether or not there are opportunities to meet with people traveling to the same place. And yes, thank you, Kelly, for answering Avery's question. Marco, the slides will be emailed to all attendees, including the recording of this presentation. So once the recording's ready, we'll send an email out and it will be available when we email you like a follow-up on sessions at Michigan, and the resources will be available on the International Center's website on the event page for this event. Okay, so I think it's time for the how to book a flight demo. So I'm excited for this part. I would like to invite anyone who has a real life example of a flight that they're planning on booking, and I'm going to kind of show you through our thought process on how to look for the best flights available. I'm going to use Google Flights as an example. And then just, yeah, talk about all the different considerations, like when I buy a flight, so different types of things that you can think about. So if anyone would like to share in the chat a flight, okay. All right. We'll try and do one for now. And I do see Santiago de Compostela, Spain, first. So Taylor, can you tell me where you'll be leaving from and also what your travel dates are? And they can be estimate. They don't have to be exact dates, but I'll use your example. And if we have more time, we can go to that. But I like the Santiago de Compostela, Spain example because it's a smaller airport. If you don't mind, Taylor.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm doing a study abroad program through the university. So the arrival time period is May 3rd to May 4th, just one of those 2 days. And then the departure is June 15th from Detroit to Santiago or the closest airport, and then back on June 15th to Detroit.
Awesome. So Detroit to Santiago de Compostela,
Mm-hmm.
May 3rd to June 15th.
Yeah, correct.
Sweet. All right. So let me get out of the presentation and go to Google Flights and see what we can come up with. Okay. So I'll start with just searching for the exact flight and see what the prices are. Santiago de Compostela. And then we got May 3rd, which coincidentally seems to be the cheapest option, which is great. And then June 15th. Once it loads. Okay. So maybe not the super cheapest option there, which is totally fine. Okay. Whoops. Okay. So then we have the dates. You can also do filters. So if you don't want to have, more than one stop, which is definitely nice. I know it's sometimes a luxury to have only one stop, or especially nonstop. You can filter by number of stops. You can filter by airlines, but unless you have specific credit card or Sky Miles with a certain airline, then it's probably not necessary to focus on a specific airline. That's maybe someone like me who's a little bit older now. That's more of a concern for me. Any baggage thoughts? You can give. Okay, so then yeah, price you can make sure it's not more than whatever 2,000, because that anything more than that would seem unreasonable. Times if you have to fly out at a certain time, or if you have to fly home at a certain time, you can filter by that. Google Flights, is trying to show you the average emissions of flights. So if you want to do something more environmentally economical, something you can do. So yeah, different things like that you can filter by. You can also track your prices. And so if you do that, then Google Flights will notify you if there are changes in flight prices. There is a date grid as well. So you can see once it loads, if there are different flight options or different price options based on location. So here's an example where it's like $14 cheaper, but you can, fly a day later and go cheaper. I would say for the most part for study abroad programs, students will typically fly in on the date recommended because that usually comes with airport transportation covered by the program. And then, yeah, especially for like first-time travelers, it's a nice idea. And then maybe students after their program, especially into the summer when the weather is getting nicer, they might think about extending it. So that's something to consider as well. And then there's also an option to see ice graph. So just another way visually to see about how your, it should be loading more, but how your flight compares to other dates and stuff. So these things are more for the flexible travelers. So just an FYI, let's get into the actual options that you have. So it looks like the cheapest option has 2 stops. And also they do flag. So if you look down at this first cheapest option, there is a change in airport, which in my opinion is not something that you would want to do. So when you get to DC, you fly into DCA airport, and then you fly out of a different airport, IAD, and you're responsible for that transfer between airports. So in my mind, that's an automatic no. That's just not, that's a headache. It's not something you want to think about, especially considering the difference in prices between like the 2 options. This one also is not the best option because the total flight time is pretty long. You have an 8-hour layover in Frankfurt. On the plus side, you get to Frankfurt at 5:30. So you could, that would be an opportunity for you to get out and explore a city for a little bit, which is kind of cool. 8 hours seems like a long time. Also be aware that airports are almost always like at least an hour outside the city center. So you'll have to factor in the time it takes to travel from the airport to the city, and then walking around the city, and then you want to be back. And you'll have to go through, since you're leaving the airport, you'll have to go through like security and stuff again. So since you're flying, since this is all going to be through Lufthansa, you will not be responsible for rechecking your luggage. So you can just have your carry-on with you. So that's nice. But yeah, just when you think of 8 hours, I would take off like almost like 2 hours each way. So you probably would have around 4 hours to actually explore a city, which you'd have to weigh the pros and cons of how bad you'd want to see like Frankfurt, Germany in this example. So depends on the person. So fortunately, this is a case where there are no other one-stop options. So this one, despite being 2 stops, it's like 4 hours shorter than the one-stop option. It's this is an example for where you go fly United, and then you'll transfer into Lufthansa. But since they're partners, it's okay that they're different airlines. So it's important for you to look at which airlines are partners with each other. So this one is not a bad option if you're only going from Detroit to Santiago de Compostela. So if you click on that option, all right, that flight is problematic because of how long it is. Well, you do have a 14-hour layover in Frankfurt. So if you're okay with, exploring more time in the city, that's not bad. All of these are long. So not a lot of options here. So I'll go to other examples in a sec. Let's just say this is the one option you're okay with staying overnight in Frankfurt. Once you click on that, the nice thing about Google Flights is it directs you to United's website. Many times, I wish there was a different example, but many times they will give other booking options, and they might sometimes show cheaper options through third parties. And that's kind of what we were recommending to be wary of because of the concerns of booking through a third party as opposed to booking through the airline directly. So if another example pops up, I'll mention that. It just didn't show up in this case. So I guess this is a good example of a flight that if you look at your options based off your departure city and your arrival city, it's not that appealing. So we can explore other options. Sorry, I'm just checking up on the chat. Yeah, just some various advice. Yeah, some credit card advice, which is great. I mean, I don't know if like a lot of undergrad students at this time are thinking about applying for credit cards, but it is something to consider because of like if you do get one, they have a lot of good sign up bonuses and you can use the miles towards a flight. So thank you, Ken. Yeah, Lily, I see that you mentioned you should book incognito because they might raise prices because you've been looking at flights. I've actually read that that's a myth. Whether that's true or not, I can't say with 100% certainty, but apparently that is like clearing your cookies or booking incognito or like using an incognito tab. Apparently that doesn't make a difference in flight prices. So that's just what I've heard. So yeah. Let's see. Okay, so let's see other options. So one thing that's nice about Google Flights is that you can include multiple airports. So you have Detroit and you have should be able to, oh, I see. Add, so then you can add Chicago O'Hare, which is a big airport. You can add Toronto. If you're from Michigan, that's something to consider. I've flown out of Toronto, which oftentimes is cheaper. I've even flown out of Windsor, which is Windsor, Canada, which seems like it's a very small airport that wouldn't have options, but whoops, I'm forgetting to add. Okay, then one more maybe would be Cleveland because of its proximity to Detroit. So there's that. So that might, especially for first-time travelers, that might be the easiest option just because of the comfortability going to an American airport first, as opposed to the other option would be thinking about airports close to your destination, such as Madrid and Barcelona, which would be the biggest airports in the region. But then what you would do is if you fly to like Madrid or Barcelona, you would then have to book a budget flight from Madrid to Santiago de Compostela or Barcelona to Santiago de Compostela. So you would have to get your luggage again and go through that process in a different country, which many times is cheaper. So if it's something you're comfortable with, you can look into it. But if that is a concern to you, that's totally valid. So maybe flying out of a different airport in the US would make more sense. Unsurprisingly, it does seem like there is a cheap option through Chicago, but see, it's a very long layover. So I don't necessarily love that one either. I'm actually surprised by how terrible these flight options are. And maybe that's why you're eager to use this as an example, Taylor. So
I'm also I'm seeing like some trains from Madrid to Santiago de
Mm,
Compostela. I don't know if that's an option that the program would recommend.
you know,
It's like 3 hours.
yeah, that's not a bad idea at all. Point, Robbie. So let's see. Wouldn't surprise me if like Chicago to Madrid would be the cheapest option. Or Toronto to Madrid nonstop. That one is very cheap and appealing. The Chicago to Madrid nonstop as well. So, yeah, so let's just use this. Well, Taylor, do you have a preference between flying out of Chicago versus Toronto?
So I'm from the West Michigan area, so I feel like
Okay,
Chicago would be more ideal, but I'm also open to whatever. So
that makes sense. So
yeah.
yeah, let's do the nonstop Chicago, like Chicago O'Hare to Madrid option. That would save quite a bit of time. And then coming home, looks like there isn't a nonstop option, but you will see American, which is kind of confusing because you think that's two different carriers. But Iberia, the flight that you'd be flying over from Chicago, Madrid nonstop, partners with American Airlines. So really any of these flights here, and I can't say with certainty, but I'm imagine that Finnair partners with American Airlines as well and Iberia. So any of these options for $961 could be a good option. And then you could actually choose where you want to have your layover. They're all reasonable layovers, except for the one in Philly is kind of long. So let's just say, for example, this first one. Let's see if and call Iberia to book that. Oh, okay, never mind. So with American, so you probably want to book directly with American. Um,
I know sometimes it's kind of weird. I was booking through Air Canada last year and they had an issue, like my credit card had an issue booking through a Canadian airline. Like they didn't like that
mm,
it was international. So you might also might be better to book with American there too.
yeah, that's a good point. And I'm from Michigan originally, so that's why I always think of Canada. But there's always a risk in flying out of Canada because of the traffic of getting through the border. It's very volatile. It depends on the time of the day of the week, a lot of factors. So Chicago is definitely safer, and Taylor, especially considering that you are on the west side of the state. It's probably not even that much longer to drive to O'Hare as opposed to TW in Detroit. So this could be a pretty good option for you, especially considering that you have a nonstop flight on the way there. And then by the end of your trip, you probably would be a little bit more comfortable with traveling, maybe traveling solo, flying, different things like that, where you could navigate a uh, a flight with a layover, especially in an airport such as JFK in New York, that is quite large. The other thing I want to mention as well is on Google Flights, they usually default to prices that are economy. And one really frustrating thing about flights nowadays is that economy flights you'll see don't include checked baggage, which is crazy. That's something that comes up. So if it's a basic economy flight, it says this with British Airways, which is more expensive, so you wouldn't want this option. But I imagine through American, it would hold true as well. So if you book a basic economy, you'll pay for check luggage. You'll pay. You won't be able to select your seats, or you would select your seats at an additional fee. Yeah, there's no flexibility on refunds or flight changes or things like that. So that's a basic level price. I would say a good rule of thumb is to add about $150 total, maybe 75 each way to bump up to like standard economy or main cabin, some airlines call it. So just something to consider when you see the sticker price. might actually be like $150-ish more expensive. So, so yeah. Taylor, just out of curiosity, does this flight seem like a possibility for you based off what's available otherwise?
Yeah, definitely. Kind of like you noted, the options were pretty slim. I've been looking over the past like week or so and trying to decide, to book something now, see if something better comes along. But I'm not thinking that to be the case. So I'm definitely thinking this is actually a really good option,
Yeah,
especially with the
and then
timing.
right. And a couple thoughts I have for you as well is it might be kind of intimidating to like go through a day of traveling, land in Madrid, and then be like, oh, now I have a 3-hour train ride. Sweet. But what you could potentially do is reach out to either your program coordinator or other students in your program and see if anyone from the Michigan or Midwest area is interested in doing what you do. So at least you are able to travel with others together and figure that out. I imagine that there will be others in the same situation as you that maybe don't have as much experience traveling, or maybe there is someone who does that would be like really helpful to travel with. And then, as someone who actually spent a couple years in Spain, and in Madrid in particular, their train system is really nice, reliable. The it would probably be a beautiful train ride from Madrid to Santiago de Compostela. So like things like that, although you probably want to factor in maybe paying anywhere from 50 to 100 more dollars when you factor in how convenient this flight option is as opposed and cost is as opposed to Detroit to Santiago de Compostela, which seem to be, I don't know, like $1,300 or something like that. Plus maybe 150 more for checked luggage. Then this might be more than good, more than better, I guess.
Right. Right. Yeah, I mean, I'm not opposed to the train, so definitely gonna look into this
Cool.
flight for sure.
Okay. Well, I just realized that it's already 3:03. So sorry, I didn't realize that this would take quite as long as it did. But hopefully the process that I went through will resonate with you regardless of where your flight is. So if it's in like Asia or South America or something like that, you can still think about flying out of different locations in the US or flying into different locations nearby where you're going. But if you do have any questions about booking flights, feel free to reach out to both me and Robbie. I'll type in my information into the chat, and we do advising appointments for any type of travel abroad, whether it's like study, intern, volunteer abroad, or just like the logistics of traveling, like booking a flight. We're happy to sit through with you and figure out what options might be the most convenient, the most economical, the best for you. So with that said, does anyone have any last minute questions before I let you all go since we're over time?
Yeah, I had just one question.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, if we take an international flight, maybe flying out of Detroit to maybe let's suppose India, and there is a connecting flight at like Chicago or Philadelphia, because I think Detroit doesn't cater to much of the international flights or international departures. So like you fly from Detroit to Chicago, then from Chicago to India. And in Chicago, there is like a layover of maybe around an hour or so. Like, what do you think should be the good time to see if like what's a good time for having a layover in Chicago, given that you also have to go through immigration process and all?
So if you have a layover in Chicago from Detroit?
Yeah, and you're
So-
leaving US from Chicago.
Oh, Wait, okay, just to be clear, are you flying from Detroit to Chicago or are you flying directly from Chicago?
It's
Where's
like
your starting point?
A starting point is Detroit. Then
Okay,
you go to Chicago. Then there is a layover out there. From there, you go directly to your international destination, whatsoever it is. So I just want to make what should be a good layover time to take into account
yeah.
while you are in Chicago.
So since you're flying from Detroit to Chicago, I wouldn't, that's domestic. So you wouldn't have to
Mhm.
go through immigration
Yeah.
since you're going from the US to the US. I would still, if possible, an hour and a half layover would be nice. I know that there are some flights where it's like an hour to an hour 15 minutes.
Mhm.
Many times if you're flying with the same airline, they will be aware if a flight is delayed. So they might be able to push back the flight if a lot of people are going, like from the Detroit to Chicago flight, are arriving, late, and you only have a half hour before the next flight.
Mhm.
With that said, it's something that's probably wouldn't be worth risking. And yeah, as
Mhm.
Chineri and Kelly noted, Chicago O'Hare is a very large airport, and sometimes you might have to travel from one terminal to another, or just a terminal in itself might be so large that they're yeah, like taking a shuttle is necessary. So I would plan, I would I think it would be easiest for you if you had at least an hour and a half between flights. But I would say the longer the better.
Mhm.
The sweet spot is probably anywhere between maybe 2 or 4 hours. Those are like ideal layover times. Anything maybe more than 4 hours would it wouldn't be great to stay in an airport that long, but I know you don't always have the luxury of getting an ideal layover time when booking a flight, especially
Yeah.
if you're price conscious.
Yeah, that is like the factor I was also wondering about, like what should be the ideal times. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah, of course. Any other questions?
No, you didn't touch on using frequent flyer miles, and I've been doing that for years, to the point of getting millions of miles through the airline. So if anybody needs info on that to travel internationally or domestically, I'm happy to share that information with you and show you some examples.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. Frequent flyer miles are a great point, especially because you can sign up for them for free and you don't even need a credit card and can accrue miles over time. I will admit that when I was a college student, that was something that wasn't even close to being on my radar, because I was like flying internationally for the first time when I studied abroad. So maybe, since this session is for like mostly for first time flyers, it might not be something completely on their radar, but as someone is flying more and more, I think it is something to be aware of. So thank you for bringing that up. And just to clarify, you can sign up for like a frequent flyer miles program on many different, pretty much every airline, and accrue points that like your miles turn into points, or they call them miles, where you can pay for future flights with those miles that you've accrued. So in the long run, it does save money. I'll admit that I probably didn't start thinking about that until like my mid-20s, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah, but thank you.
Elite status, and that gets you free baggage and lounge access.
Yeah.
Takes a long time to get to that point. I wanted to add something about the layovers. I don't know if the aggregated sites offer this, but if you find a really good looking flight with a relatively short layover, you could go to the airline site and look for that flight, and the airline site tells what percentage on time arrivals that flight has. And you can still go back and buy the ticket on the aggregate site if it's cheaper, but you don't want to risk an hour and a half layover with a flight that only has a 51% arrival on time situation. So, take advantage of the data that is available on the airline site to make decisions about how long your layover needs to be.
Yeah, thank you, Shaneri. Great point. And I think it's something that's especially important coming from a region of the world where weather can greatly affect whether or not flights arrive on time. So like flying out of Michigan, even in May, you know, you never know if there's going to be snow or heavy rain or wind or different types of external factors that could prevent layovers. So that's a great point, Shaneri, to look at the airline's website themselves for that data. Okay, and then I don't see any more questions. So thank you everyone for your additional comments. Thank you for joining. And just to clarify, the recording of this presentation will be available to everyone as well as the slides. So with that said, I will stop recording.